It was a moment that no one could have predicted. A quiet, poised woman, known for her elegance and reserved nature, standing up to a blatantly disrespectful question from a reporter. Melania Trump, the former First Lady of the United States, had always been someone who preferred to maintain a dignified silence in the face of media scrutiny. However, on this day something snapped. The question she was asked was so pointed, so clearly designed to provoke, that Melania had no choice but to respond. The scene unfolded at a press event that was meant to be about a charitable cause, something close to Melania's heart. The media coverage was supposed to be focused on the positive impact of her Be Best initiative, which aimed to support children, combat cyberbullying, and promote overall well-being. It should have been an event celebrating progress and good deeds, but, as with so many things related to the Trump family, the media couldn't resist turning it into something else. Melania was standing on stage, gracefully answering questions about the initiative. Everything seemed to be going as expected, until one reporter raised their hand, asking a question that was anything but appropriate. "Mrs. Trump," the reporter began, with a tone that seemed a bit too sharp, "with all the criticism surrounding your husband's presidency, do you ever feel responsible for some of the rhetoric and actions coming from the White House?" The question hung in the air, laced with judgment and a clear political agenda. It was an attack, disguised as a question, and Melania's face shifted. For a split second there was a brief pause, a moment of hesitation as she considered the implications of the reporter's words. It was obvious to everyone in the room that the reporter's question wasn't one meant to engage in a constructive conversation. It was meant to poke, to provoke, to push her buttons. The room fell silent, and eyes were locked on Melania, waiting to see how she would respond. This was a woman who had long been silent in the face of public scrutiny. She had spent years maintaining a controlled public image, carefully choosing her words and actions. But this question was different. It was personal, it was rude, and it was meant to elicit a reaction. Then, in a moment that stunned everyone in the room, Melania Trump did something no one expected. She spoke, but not just any words. Her response was measured, but the power behind her words was undeniable. She looked directly at the reporter, her gaze unwavering, and said, "I am not responsible for what happens in the White House. I am responsible for my work, for my mission to help children, and for the people who believe in my efforts. Your question is inappropriate, and I won't dignify it with further response." Her words hit with the force of a sharp rebuke, leaving the room in stunned silence. The reporter, taken aback by the firmness and grace with which Melania had handled the question, stood there momentarily speechless. But it wasn't just the reporter who was stunned. In that moment, the entire room, along with millions of viewers watching from around the world, realized something. Melania Trump had found her voice in a way few had ever expected. Her strength and confidence were on full display, and the sharpness of her response sent a clear message. She would not allow herself to be disrespected or reduced to a political pawn. As the press conference continued, there was a new energy in the room. The atmosphere had shifted from discomfort to awe. People were now paying attention, not just to her charitable efforts, but to the power behind her presence. Melania Trump had taken control of the narrative in a way few could have imagined. The aftermath of Melania Trump's fiery response to the reporter's rude question spread quickly, causing a stir across news outlets and social media. It wasn't just the fact that she had spoken up. It was the manner in which she did it. With grace, composure, and an undeniable assertiveness that left many in the public and in the press stunned. For a long time, Melania had been a figure in the background, often seen but rarely heard. She had spent much of her time in the public eye as the quiet partner, never fully embracing the same level of attention or scrutiny that came with being First Lady. In contrast to her husband's often combative and outspoken style, Melania's approach was more reserved. But after that exchange, people began to realize there was much more to her than anyone had given her credit for. The media, of course, couldn't resist covering the incident. The question and Melania's sharp rebuke quickly became the topic of conversation in newsrooms across the country. The liberal media, which had often criticized Melania for her silence, were forced to reckon with her boldness. The tone of their reporting shifted from the typical portrayals of her as a silent figure to that of someone who had just demonstrated a rare moment of strength. One headline from a major news outlet read, "Melania Trump shocks reporter with powerful response. A new side to the First Lady emerges." The article highlighted how her response showed that Melania was no longer willing to tolerate disrespect and was fully capable of standing her ground in the face of criticism. The writer noted how, for many, it was a turning point in how the public viewed her. On the other side of the political spectrum, conservative outlets celebrated Melania's quick-witted response. Finally, someone willing to stand up for themselves and push back against the narrative that political figures should always be submissive, wrote one conservative columnist. Melania Trump proved that she won't be silenced or diminished, even by the press. The debate soon spread to social media, where people from across the political spectrum were sharing their thoughts. Many praised Melania's response, expressing admiration for her ability to remain composed while still making a powerful statement. It was clear that, despite her previous reputation as someone who preferred to keep a low profile, she had just redefined her public image. One Twitter user wrote, "Melania Trump just put that reporter in his place and did it with class. More women need to stand up like this when they're being attacked or disrespected. Melania Trump? Respect." Others commented on how rare it was to see a public figure, particularly a woman in such a high-profile position, handle criticism in such a level-headed and powerful way. But, as with all things related to the Trump family, the reaction wasn't entirely positive. Critics of the Trump family found themselves struggling with how to respond to a moment that was both undeniably strong and dignified. Some questioned whether Melania's response had been too harsh, while others pointed out that she had only deflected the question without fully addressing the underlying issue. Yet no one could deny the impact of what had just occurred. Melania had taken control of the situation in a way that not only left the reporter speechless, but also reshaped how she would be seen moving forward. She wasn't just the quiet wife of a controversial president anymore. She was a force to be reckoned with. In the days that followed, Melania's response became the subject of countless discussions in media panels and talk shows. Many noted that while she had often been viewed as passive or non-confrontational, this moment proved that she had the strength and confidence to defend herself and her work when necessary. The woman who had once stayed in the background was now front and center, commanding attention and respect in a way that few had anticipated. The public reaction was equally telling. Polls showed an uptick in Melania's approval ratings, particularly among women who saw her self-confidence as something they could relate to and admire. For many, Melania's exchange with the reporter wasn't just a fleeting moment, it was a defining one, showcasing the kind of inner strength that could reshape her legacy. Melania Trump had shown America that, while she may not always be the loudest voice in the room, when she spoke, she did so with purpose and conviction. And in doing so, she had silenced any doubts about her ability to stand up for herself in a world that often demanded conformity. As the days and weeks passed after Melania Trump's bold response to the reporter's rude question, the long-term effects of the moment began to become clearer. What had initially been seen as a single, isolated incident began to shape the way the public and the media viewed her, transforming her image from a silent figure to a strong and assertive woman who had the capacity to defend herself when needed. In the days following the press conference, Melania's actions and words became a defining moment for her public persona. She had shown the world that, while she had often remained silent and reserved in the past, She was more than capable of handling difficult situations with poise and decisiveness. For the first time, many began to see her not as just the wife of a controversial figure, but as an individual who had her own voice and a unique sense of self. Women across the country, in particular, found Melania's response incredibly empowering. The incident had sparked a conversation about assertiveness and self-respect, and many began to view Melania as an example of how to stand up for oneself without resorting to anger or rudeness. Instead of reacting with hostility to the reporter's provocation, she had maintained composure and dignity, effectively disarming the situation without escalating the tension. Melania Trump just showed us how to take control of our own narrative without being aggressive, one woman wrote on social media. Her response was strong, calm, and respectful. Everything you need when you're dealing with a difficult situation. At the same time, Melania's rise in public esteem wasn't limited to just women. Her ability to handle a public confrontation with such grace resonated with people of all backgrounds. Her words and actions were being shared and discussed across social platforms, in classrooms, and even in corporate settings. Melania had unintentionally become a role model for how to handle public scrutiny and personal attacks. But beyond her newfound respect, there was also a noticeable shift in the media's portrayal of her. Before the incident, the mainstream press had often focused on Melania's silence and aloofness. She was often portrayed as a passive bystander, with little to no voice in the political conversation. But after the press conference, the media began to shift the narrative. Suddenly, Melania was not just the wife of a former president. She was an empowered individual who wasn't afraid to speak up when it mattered most. The next time she attended a public event or made a statement, the tone of the media coverage had changed. Reporters, who had once focused primarily on her appearance or lack of engagement with her husband's political career, now focused on her stance and confidence. Even political commentators who had long been critical of her role started to acknowledge that there was more to her than they had initially believed. Melania had also become a symbol for those who felt unheard or misunderstood. Her ability to face disrespect head-on and refuse to let it define her was an important moment for many people who had been subjected to similar situations in their own lives. For the first time, they saw Melania as someone they could relate to, someone who had struggled with public perception but had found a way to assert herself. Melania Trump's response to the reporter wasn't just about her. It was about all of us who have ever been looked down on, dismissed, or questioned in a way that wasn't fair, said a journalist covering the event. She handled it in a way that showed her strength as a person, not just as a political spouse. In the weeks after the incident, Melania's confidence continued to grow. She became more vocal in her charitable efforts, using her platform to further push her Be Best initiative, which focused on mental health, anti-bullying, and online safety for children. There was a renewed sense of purpose in her approach to her role as a public figure. Her voice, once quiet and passive, had transformed into one that demanded to be heard. The public's respect for Melania grew as she continued to stand her ground and take charge of the narrative surrounding her. She was no longer just seen as an accessory to her husband's political career. She was becoming a voice of her own, one that stood strong in the face of adversity. Her actions had proven that, regardless of her background or the expectations placed on her as the First Lady, Melania Trump was capable of leading on her own terms. And her newfound ability to stand up for herself set a powerful example for others to follow. What began as a tense exchange between Melania Trump and a reporter quickly evolved into a story that transcended the political lines that had so often defined her family's public life. Instead of the usual partisan divide, the reaction to Melania's fiery response sparked a surprising and unified wave of support. It was a rare moment where the public saw beyond political affiliations, focusing instead on the strength of character Melania had shown. Initially, some expected the backlash to come swiftly, particularly from her detractors. After all, the Trump family had long been a lightning rod for political contention, and Melania herself had been both praised and criticized for her silence on various issues. But on that day, when she stood up for herself in front of the cameras, the reaction was different. What followed was an outpouring of admiration, not just from her supporters, but from unexpected corners of the political spectrum. It started with political commentators who had typically been critical of Melania's low profile. Many of them were caught off guard by her calm assertiveness and confidence. Some, who had previously dismissed her as a passive figure in her husband's political career, now found themselves reconsidering their perspective. In that moment, Melania showed us something far more important than what we usually see from public figures, said one prominent political analyst. She showed that you can be strong and still remain classy and respectful. But the real shock came when people from both sides of the political aisle spoke up in her defense. Conservative voices, who had long been supportive of the Trump family, applauded Melania's ability to rise above the political noise and command respect without resorting to confrontation. "Melania Trump just did something extraordinary," said one conservative pundit. "She handled that reporter with grace and self-respect, something we should all be striving for in our public lives." On the other hand, liberals who had often been critical of the Trump family and Melania herself also expressed admiration. "I may not agree with everything that the Trumps stand for, but Melania just showed me that we should all have more respect for one another," tweeted a well-known progressive journalist. Her response was not about politics. It was about standing up for yourself and not tolerating disrespect. That's something we can all agree on. The unification of support across party lines was truly striking. The incident had somehow moved past the usual political discourse, with people from different backgrounds and beliefs coming together to recognize a fundamental quality: dignity in the face of adversity. In a time when the political landscape was as divided as ever, Melania's composed response had become a shared point of agreement. This unity of support was also reflected in the comments section of news articles and social media posts about the incident. People across the political spectrum, even those who had openly criticized Melania and her family in the past, left messages applauding her for her calm and decisive reaction. "We may not agree on politics," one comment read, "but there's no denying that Melania Trump handled this with grace. She deserves credit for that." Interestingly, this widespread admiration for Melania's response also highlighted the collective weariness many felt toward the polarization of politics. For a brief moment, the public had set aside partisan divisions and rallied behind a shared value: the importance of treating one another with respect, regardless of political beliefs. "What we saw today was a rare moment of unity," said one commentator. "It's been so long since we've seen a public figure rise above politics and show what it means to be human." Melania's bold but graceful response also had a profound impact on her own personal brand. Once viewed primarily as the First Lady of the United States, she had now begun to redefine herself. In the weeks that followed, Melania continued to focus on her Be Best initiative and her commitment to helping children, all while maintaining a newfound confidence in her public interactions. She wasn't just a silent figure anymore. She was taking charge of her own narrative, demanding respect without compromise. As the media coverage surrounding the incident continued, it became clear that Melania had moved into a new phase of her public life. She had demonstrated that even in the face of uncomfortable situations and negative press, it was possible to remain true to oneself and stand up for what's right without descending into anger or hostility. Her unexpected outburst of strength had shifted the way people thought about her, and in doing so had sparked a more nuanced and respectful conversation about the roles women and public figures can play in navigating the world's challenges. Rather than being defined by others' perceptions, Melania Trump had defined herself in that one powerful moment. In the weeks following Melania Trump's explosive response to the rude reporter's question, it became clear that her words had left a lasting impact, not just in the media, but in the hearts and minds of the American public. What had begun as a small, unexpected confrontation had transformed into a defining moment in her public life, one that reshaped how people viewed her and solidified her legacy as a strong, independent individual. Before that fateful exchange, Melania had largely been seen as a reserved, almost aloof figure. She was admired for her elegance and her focus on her Be Best initiative, but her public persona was often overshadowed by the political drama surrounding her husband's presidency. She rarely spoke out in public, preferring to maintain a low profile. But that day, in the face of a provocative and disrespectful question, Melania had stepped forward and asserted her dignity in a way that no one expected. Her boldness reverberated far beyond the press conference room. The media coverage, which initially focused on the tension between Melania and the reporter, soon shifted to highlight the strength of character she had shown. Major news outlets, which had typically been quick to criticize her for her quietness or perceived lack of engagement, were now praising her for the self-assurance and composure she had displayed. One leading political analyst wrote, "In an era where public figures are expected to respond to every question, Melania Trump showed us a different kind of leadership. She didn't give in to provocation, and she didn't let her personal emotions get the best of her. Instead, she owned the moment with calm and clarity." Her decision to handle the situation with grace and assertiveness became a lesson for many. People across the country, regardless of their political views, began to discuss the idea that personal integrity and respect were values that should always come first. For Melania, the response had been a turning point. She had not only defended herself, but had reclaimed her narrative in a public and powerful way. As time went on, it became clear that Melania's actions had done something unexpected. They had unified the public, even if just for a moment. In a time when the political landscape was deeply divided, people found common ground in her ability to respond to hostility with dignity. Social media, which often thrives on conflict, was flooded with messages of admiration and support, many of which came from individuals who had previously been critical of the Trump family. "I've been hard on the Trumps in the past, but Melania just showed us all what true strength looks like," tweeted one user. "It's easy to be angry, but it takes real courage to stay calm and speak with purpose." What Melania had done was not just about winning a single confrontation. It was about redefining how people saw her. In that one moment, she transformed from the quiet, almost mysterious figure into someone who could hold her ground with grace, while still maintaining her dignity. She became someone who could take the heat and stand tall, regardless of public opinion. For Melania, this change in public perception was empowering. The press had once been quick to label her as the silent First Lady or the passive partner. Now they were talking about her as a woman who had found her voice and was no longer willing to be defined by others. As she continued to support her Be Best initiative, she did so with newfound confidence, knowing that her actions were now being seen not just through the lens of her husband's presidency, but through the lens of her own powerful presence. This incident also had a long-term impact on her public engagements. As she began to take on more visible roles in promoting her causes, Melania did so with the understanding that she was now being viewed as an individual leader, not just as the wife of a political figure. The way she handled herself in that moment had set a new standard for how the public saw her, and it was a standard that she would continue to live up to. Melania's legacy, shaped by that one powerful moment, became one of strength and resilience. She had shown that true leadership didn't require loud declarations or political posturing. It came from the quiet confidence of standing firm when it mattered most. For Melania, that day marked a shift from being a passive onlooker to becoming an active participant in shaping her own story. As time went on, Melania's response to the reporter's question would be remembered as one of the defining moments of her time in the public eye. It wasn't just about defending her dignity, it was about shifting perceptions and showing the world that, despite the polarization of politics, the strength of a person's character could still shine through. As the dust settled after Melania Trump's explosive response to the reporter's rude question, many began to reflect on what this moment meant for her future, both personally and publicly. It wasn't just the immediate reaction that was important. It was the lasting impact it had on her legacy. The way Melania handled that confrontation had shifted the narrative around her, not just as the wife of a controversial political figure, but as an individual who had strength, grace, and the ability to command respect in any situation. With this newfound public admiration, many wondered what Melania's next steps would be. Having spent much of her time in the background during her husband's presidency, Melania was now stepping into a new chapter of her life. She had redefined herself as someone who could speak up when necessary and take control of the narrative around her. Her moment of defiance had proven that she wasn't just a figurehead, she was a force to be reckoned with. One immediate effect was her public visibility. While Melania had always been a private figure, this experience had brought her into the spotlight in a way that felt authentic and personal. No longer was she just the quiet partner to Donald Trump. She was now an independent public figure who was capable of defending herself and shaping her own future. The question on everyone's mind became, what role would Melania take moving forward? First, it was clear that she would continue her focus on Be Best, the initiative she had championed during her time as First Lady. Her efforts to combat cyberbullying, promote children's well-being, and encourage healthy living would only gain more traction now that the public had seen her as someone willing to stand up for her values. The strength she had shown in her interaction with the reporter aligned perfectly with the message she had been sending through her platform. Respect for others and self-respect were critical in today's world. Her increased visibility also opened the door for her to potentially take on more philanthropic roles. She could have become more involved in global humanitarian causes, or perhaps find herself leading more initiatives dedicated to empowerment and women's rights, fields where her voice could have a powerful impact. Her actions had already started to shape the conversation about how she would engage with the public moving forward. In addition to her charitable work, the attention on Melania had opened a conversation about her future role in the political landscape. While it seemed unlikely that she would immediately embrace a formal political career, her recent responses and confidence had shown that she was no longer simply a figure in the background. Many political analysts speculated that, should she choose to enter the political arena, Melania could be a force for positive change. She had already demonstrated that she could inspire both sides of the aisle, proving that people from differing political backgrounds could respect her as a voice of unity. Some political commentators even floated the idea of her potentially running for a leadership position, or becoming a voice of moderation in the ever-deepening divide between America's political factions. However, that possibility remained speculative. What was clear, though, was that Melania had changed the trajectory of her public life. Melania's legacy, shaped by her moments of quiet strength and independence, would undoubtedly influence future generations of women and public figures. She had shown that it was possible to navigate the complexities of public life without compromising one's values, and she had done so with an authenticity that was increasingly rare in the world of politics and media. As she moved into the next phase of her life, one thing remained certain. Melania Trump had emerged as a stronger figure, not just for her family, but for the broader public. Her confidence, ability to handle pressure, and commitment to her work would continue to shape how she was remembered, not just as the wife of a president, but as a leader in her own right. What's next for Melania Trump is yet to be fully determined, but what is certain is that she has reclaimed her narrative and has set herself on a path where she can continue to make a lasting impact. In a world where public figures often struggled to define themselves amidst constant scrutiny, Melania had shown that sometimes strength comes not from reacting to the world around you, but from owning your space and speaking your truth when it matters most. What do you think of Melania Trump's powerful response to the reporter? Do you believe her actions will change how she is viewed in the future? Share your thoughts in the comments below. If this story inspired you, don't forget to like, subscribe, and turn on notifications for more stories of strength, leadership, and resilience. Let's keep the conversation going.